So I want to show you a few tidbits that make me think that, what happened in the way I said. So this is an example. We believe that this was a text made by Xana on TikTok at, I think it was 4:17, I believe, a.m. And it says, "Never forget the foundation in the bathtub." Now, we think that this is a cryptic message from the killer, and I'm going to show you later on that Kohberger, I think, can be very cryptic and likes puzzles and likes to say things like this to make to kind of torment people almost with his quizzes, his questions, that kind of thing, and his statements. So we think that this was made by the Perp, not by Xana. So that is one piece of evidence, or piece of what part of my thought processes, shall we say. So then we think that Kohberger, or the Perp, whoever the Perp is, posted as anonymous, and I've showed you a couple of those before now, after the murders. And this is an example where I think he posted this. And he even says, this is on 12th of December 2022, so this is before anyone knew it was Kohberger, right? He's hiding in the woods in Shithole, PA, Pennsylvania. And, he's saying stuff like, "I hung their intestines from a ceiling fan," and I'm not going to read the second part. But I think this is somebody with a superiority complex, somebody using an anonymous pseudonym on social media. It follows a pattern that we're seeing in this case. And it also gives a little bit of a puzzle for someone to sort of work out where he is, kind of thing, in Shithole, PA, in the woods, hiding in the woods. I think he's trying to torment the police and say, "I'm here hiding and you're not going to find me," kind of thing. And I just think this is, as you see more of these posts, you're going to see a pattern, I think. So let's have a look. So we've already talked about this part. Yeah, sorry, we've already talked about that one. So, and we've talked about the redacted, which is, to me, another clue that Ethan Chapin was beheaded, unfortunately, I think that's why it's redacted, because it's too graphic, and if it had a picture there, that would be too graphic to show anybody. So now this is something that we think the Perp posted on 4chan, I think it was, where he showed that the timestamp that was on, I think, Xana's phone, I think it was related to, was actually at 12:12:14, rather than the time that it looks like, which is like 4:17 a.m. or something like that. So this again seemed to me like someone that really knew a lot about the case, really knew a lot about the technology involved, knew how timestamps work, and was trying to say to the police, "I'm cleverer than you," kind of thing, and so on. I wish we had the full picture of this. If anyone knows where this is, the original, I would love to know so that I could actually find that and show that in more detail. So there's another piece here, which this is anonymous again, with the timestamp information. And that timestamp information was sort of attached to this post. So it was kind of copied into the post. So that is, him I think it's him tormenting the police and saying, "I know that post wasn't made at 4:17 a.m. It was made at 12:12 or whatever it was." This too, this whole thing about the timestamp for Xana's dad was saying that the last time he spoke to his daughter was at midnight, but we think the Perp posted this saying that he knew that really that was 11 p.m. and not midnight. So we think, that was the perp too, but we don't know. This is all just speculation. Okay, so let's look at the house after the murders. So this is not in any particular order. There's going to be a lot of stuff here. So it says here they discovered the bodies, or they discovered Xana at least, about 30 minutes before the 911 call. They called friends at Sigma to come over, who in turn called the police. So I think that's Ethan's friend Hunter, basically, and some of his roommates. It's right across the street, and for whatever reason, they believed it was people from Sigma upstairs that night. So they thought the Sigma Chi people were involved in some way. So that's something that was thrown about. Let's look at this. So I've showed you the redacted. What else? Right. So later on, the redacted PCA was altered, and this was added instead. So let me just show you how that looks. So this was the original, where it was redacted, and there was a whole page missing here. And then this is what it ended up being afterwards. They changed it, and there's a signature here and a sort of a date stamp kind of thing, and then it just carries on to the next page about the coroner's report, the autopsy report. Sorry. So that's another little bit of a puzzle. We're not sure why that was done like that, but probably just to protect the parents from having to see, the beheaded Ethan everywhere. So after the murders, the scene was so terrible that officers who were really experienced officers were breaking down at the scene. It wasn't a clean crime scene. There was cross-contamination between the rooms. It wasn't a professional job. This was something more haphazard. So this was a really bad scene, and we've got a few quotes on that of how bad that scene was. So on top of officers reporting blood seeping through the floors, and we could see that through the walls on the outside, they noticed the stench due to the amount of blood. The officers also took note that all other rooms in the house were left unscathed beside the 2 rooms of the 4 victims where they were found. So, there was a terrible stench. There was blood seeping through floors and walls, and it was horrible. So that was a really gruesome crime scene. Here, this is Gunderson, and he's a very experienced investigator. He was unprepared for the strong smell of blood that rose up in his nostrils the moment he walked inside. The coroner, who had once been an emergency room nurse in an earlier stage of her life, would describe the scene as chaos, lots of blood. Few others would even attempt to put into words what they saw. There are moments, cops will tell you, that are too profound, too unnerving to be experienced in the present. All you can do is move forward. There will be time later to process it. So it was hard for even seasoned investigators, seasoned cops to process. It was a lot. Let's look at this one. So this is again about the stench of blood. The house smelled of blood. So again, this is another reason to think that DM Dillon would not have waited so long to call the police till like lunchtime. It would have smelt so bad in that house. Like immediately after the murders, she would know that something was badly wrong, I think. So I just don't think she waited that long. I just don't believe that. I think the police have kept some of that information to themselves for a number of reasons, I can imagine. So we've got investigators who've been on the job for 20 and 30 years, and they say they've never seen anything like that. So it was really bad. There was so much blood that it oozed through the walls of the 3-story house near the campus. Really, really terrible scene. Again, the worst they've ever seen. There was blood everywhere. yeah, blood drips down the side of the wall. So this is a picture that a lot of people have seen, where you can just see all the blood coming down from Xana's room down to the ground. Horrible, horrible scene. I think this one we've already seen, have we? Oh, so she said she'd been a coroner for 16 years. We have had multiple victim murders in the past, but nothing like this, she said. So it's really, really bad. Now, at this point, Police Chief Fry says we cannot say that there is no threat to the community. Now, I believe on November the 16th, he said there is a threat out there possibly, but then we do not have a suspect at this time and the individual is still out there. We cannot say there's no threat to the community. But then I know they turned around at one time and said that there was a threat to the community. So there was a lot of confusion right at the beginning. There's a lot of haziness surrounding the grisly discovery. Confusion ensued in the hours before the police were called, said another neighbour, who identified herself as the best friend of one of the surviving roommates and asked not to be named for privacy reasons. She said she came to the house soon after the crime was discovered and learned from the surviving roommates, DM and BF, which is Dylan and Bethany, that someone on the second floor wasn't moving. So I think this person came with Hunter from across the road, when they were called to say that something was badly wrong. She said they first presumed the person had ingested something from someone that was laced, so they thought it must be a drug problem. But it wasn't until later that she learned that these kids had been stabbed and were not unconscious, but they were dead. So she wasn't comprehending how big this thing was at the time. But again, we don't explicitly hear here that they didn't call 911 until midday. I still think that 911 was called very early. A friend and neighbour of the victims who said they often visited that house with a large balcony and a barbecue and a sofa in the backyard described it as a normal girl party house. Several residents of the building next door described disruptive late-night parties with loud music, numerous visitors, and an unlocked door. Well, we know that, and that's pretty much established, I think. I don't think that's a question. So the crime has been committed. We know that for certain. The brutality was unbelievable. News was out at 8 a.m. in the morning with kids texting and calling each other, thanks to the roommates that were still alive in that house, totally unharmed. So at 8 in the morning to 10 a.m., most students and some parents knew what had happened, but yet no phone call till 11:58. It just doesn't make sense. I don't believe it. I honestly believe that they called the police pretty much 4:30, 4:40, something like that in the morning. So this is saying that there was a shelter in place for students, but only for 3 hours, which that is really crazy and strange because, no one knew who had done it at this point. The officer assigned to investigate the crime never got there till 4:30. And when they say 4:30, I'm not sure if that means 4:30 a.m. or 4:30 p.m. In the records. It's ambiguous, and the coroner never showed up till 4:30 to 5 p.m. I'm not sure if the coroner turned up at 4:30 a.m. actually, and this was purposely misconstrued. I'm not sure, but yes, there's a lot of confusion about the timeline, and I think that's intentional personally. So they took the shelter in place off 3 hours later after the 911 call. Did they know who they were going to pin it on? This idea of pinning it on someone has come up again and again. I don't think they're pinning it on anyone. I think they've got a lot of evidence to pin it on Kohberger. That's my belief, personal belief. So how did they know? They let BK come to Pullman for weeks all the way to Pennsylvania. See, I don't think they knew it was him for certain until they got enough evidence. But I think they were gathering that evidence. They weren't trying to pin it on him. I think they were just making sure it was really him. but they were shadowing him, they were watching him, and so on. So the coroner paused when asked, were the victims on the bed? And I think this is because Ethan was partly on the bed maybe, but his head was in the bath, I think. I think he was actually behind the door, his body, and I think his head was in the bath. But I think the pause and the coroner isn't sure what to say is because she doesn't want to say that his head was, he was beheaded. So yes, there's a lot of strange things going on in this case, and there's a lot of unknowns, but I think, during the court case, we're going to hear a lot more. So there's been a lot of speculation about the 911 call, why it came so late at nearly midday on the Sunday lunchtime, and why they didn't call the police earlier. So why the surviving roommates didn't call the police earlier. Now, there are lots of possible explanations for this, but I've gone through so much material now that I've come to a conclusion that is extremely controversial. But this is what I think happened. So I think that they did, DM and BF, Dylan and Bethany, I think they did call Hunter over. Hunter is Ethan's best friend. He lived right across the road, because they couldn't open the door to Xana's room. But I think they did that around 4:40 a.m. I think they did it early, straight after the murders, pretty much. I think that Hunter couldn't open the door, so he took a ladder to Xana's bedroom, and we see the ladder in the pictures from the crime scene right at the beginning, straight after the crimes happened, kind of thing. I think he climbed up to see through Xana's bedroom window, and then he realized the enormity of what had happened, and he shouted out, to call 911, kind of thing. At the same time, I think DM Dylan found something in the bathroom, possibly Ethan's head, sadly, and ran out of the house screaming, perhaps calling 911, but fainting before she could actually talk to the 911 operator, I think. And then I think Hunter picked up the call and probably was very emotional, and the 911 operator couldn't understand what he was saying, so labelled it as unconscious person. I think the police were there very, very soon after this, well before 5 a.m. And the reason I think that, there's a lot of reasons why I think that, but one of the reasons is if you listen to the Linda Lane footage between 4:30 a.m. and 5 a.m., there are many cars entering that area in what I call dark mode. So they haven't got their lights on, they haven't got their flashing lights on, they're very quiet. They do beep a couple of times when they lock the car doors though. So there is that, you can tell that there's some cars arriving, and you can hear the sweep of the cars coming in. The way they come in, it sounds like police cars in an urgent fashion to me, if you listen very carefully. So I think the police were there by 5 a.m. I think they quickly realized how serious this was, and I think they realized that the perpetrator was a mass murderer or serial killer type of psychology. And that kind of perp usually comes back to the scene to see the fuss they've made. And I think that the police wanted to see if they could entice the perp to come close to the scene, to revisit the scene as a way of like trapping them and catching them, kind of thing, or trick them into calling 911. And of course, we know he did return. We know he did come back at 9 a.m. Around 9 a.m. to 9:30, somewhere between those two times. We also know that a Hyundai Elantra was seen kind of driving down Willenta Drive and back again around that time as well. And maybe he is the one who called 911 at nearly midday, because they've been very secretive. The police are very secretive about who made that 911 call and how it was made and so on. So maybe he did. And maybe they're just keeping it quiet about the first 911 call so that, they don't let Brian Kohberger know that they know what was going on here. So there's a lot of reasons why I think all of this. So there's a lot of reports from the students on the scene that day that early in the morning, before 8 o'clock, I believe, there were plainclothes detectives. There was somebody out the back of the house talking to DM and BF, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, outside the sliding door and smoking and talking intensely. Now, I think that was plainclothes detectives asking them questions. Obviously, they'd have to be outside of the crime scene so they didn't further contaminate the crime scene. And I think they were asking them questions about what had happened. And at 8:30 a.m., a couple of the neighbors saw this group smoking outside the sliding door and talking intently, but they didn't recognize a lot of them. So I think they were plainclothes detectives. I think this is also why the front door was reported to be open at 8 a.m. by a dog walker, a lady walking her dog, I think it was. And it also explains why so many students knew that the murders had happened well before that 911 call is supposed to have happened at nearly lunchtime. It also makes much more sense that DM Dylan would have called 911 a lot earlier. It just seems one of those facts that we just can't get around the idea that she waited till midday to call the police in this case. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to play you some extracts from a video that show you how many people knew about this before that 911 call is supposed to have happened at roughly midday, just before midday. So I'm going to play for you this video by True Crime Design about the Idaho 4, the cover-up before the 911 call. And it makes it clear that lots of people knew about these crimes way before that lunchtime 911 call. I'm going to turn off the sound and I'm going to talk over it. So let's go. So let's start back here. Okay, so there's a lady called Kim, and she hears from her daughter that this has happened, but she hears about it way before the 911 call. So a WSU parent named Kim has come forward to share this information about the timeline that she learned from her daughter directly. Her identity has been verified by these people, so we know she really is a WSU parent. The following is what she told us about the King Road homicides, basically. So she was talking to her daughter about what had happened, and she told her that 4 students had been stabbed and they'd died. And she was like, how do you know that? And she said, well, her sorority sister knew somebody who had a boyfriend who's in the University of Idaho, and they talked to all the Pi Phi girls, and everybody knows, basically. So they're all in the same class, PC class together, and that's how they all keep in touch. And of course, social media and texting and stuff is very fast in cases like this. So this boyfriend goes to UI, and they're friends with the Pi Phi girls, and that's how they knew all this. But how did the Pi Phi girls know? And this is at 10 o'clock a.m. that day. And they're like, I don't know. How come they knew then? And, nobody else knew until noon, theoretically. I think the truth is that a lot of people did know before that because, the police were there very early, I think. And I don't think the 911 or the first 911 call didn't come through as late as noon. I think it came through quite early, very soon after the murders. So this girl's saying that their roommates locked themselves in the rooms because they weren't sure what was happening. So she said, did they call 911? And she says, I don't know. But this is what she was told. That they realized things didn't add up. But at like 8 a.m., a lot of people knew about this. Early in the morning, 8 o'clock. So there was a sorority sister involved who knew stuff at 8:30 a.m. and things like that. So these people all knew very early on that something was going on. And you can see this video out on YouTube. Just search for the cover-up before the 911 call under Idaho 4. So then they were talking about possibly it being a shakedown and possibly it being a drug incident and things like that. And some rumors said that the people had been shot rather than stabbed. And there were all kinds of rumors going around, but they all knew something had happened very early on, like 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m. So I'm going to go a bit more forward. There's a guy who, so this guy was about to go to work at 9 a.m. and he hadn't even had the shower yet. So it was like 8:30 by the time he was looking at his messages. And at 8:30 a.m., all his friends were saying, "Did you know what had happened?" And they're all talking about it. And, all these messages had already come through. So by 8:30, a lot of people knew. And this is way before he went to work at 9:30. So, he knew about it and all his friends knew about it way before 9:30 a.m. So definitely lots of people knew about this before 9:30 a.m. So I think I can't believe that all those people, none of them called 911. I just don't believe that. I just can't believe that. So I think 911 were actually called very early on. I think they were called probably before 5 a.m. So that's my theory.